big part of that is having people who bring complementary skills and people who are willing to challenge each other. So the worst case, and I've been here before, you try and build a strategy and everyone says the same thing and they sort of agree when the chief executive says what they want to do. And then you end up with a chief executive's wish list, which is not a strategy at all.
Hi, I'm Belden Menkus. Welcome to the Purposeful Strategist, the podcast that shifts the conversation about purpose and strategy from what organizations should do to what business leaders actually are doing and what they've learned along the way. My guest today is David Hynam, Chief Executive Officer of LV, one of the UK's leading mutual insurers serving over 1 million members and customers. LV are specialists in investment, protection, retirement, and in-house advice. And they offer a range of products and services designed to help customers plan for a secure financial future. David joined LV in 2022, bringing 30-plus years of experience across insurance sectors, including senior roles at Barclays, AXA UK, Friends Life, and Bupa UK. Since then, he's been focused on strengthening LV's mutual identity and continuing to build financial strength with an emphasis on long-term member value. David, welcome to the Purposeful Strategist.
Thank you very much for having me.
No, it's really great to have you here. And maybe, if you don't mind, just start with insurance, because it's often sort of misunderstood by people who, let me say, are from the outside, who maybe don't really fully have a sense of what it's about. So what's the role it plays today in people's lives and sort of in the broader UK insurance and retirement landscape?
Well, I probably wouldn't normally say this look back, but I do think history is important when you think about that question. So when LV started back in 1843, we set out to help people put aside some money so that they could bury their loved ones with dignity. Now, of course, over time, the breadth and strength of insurance has changed massively over the years. But that said, the purpose remains at the heart of LV. So today, we're a very well-recognized leading financial mutual. We serve over 1 million members and customers. We've got a focused but diverse range of investment, protection, and retirement products. But I think what's important in the question is that although the core of the purpose hasn't changed, what people now need from life and pensions products has. So just a couple of examples of how that shows up even today. Mental health is now one of the biggest drivers of financial insecurity. It's something that forms part of our own protection products and many others. And just in the past year, we've seen around a 60% increase in demand for those services. And people also expect more breadth in what policies cover, such as having remote GP and rehabilitation, which are becoming increasingly standard in the insurance world. And then another thing that's changed is that a lot of insurers have moved into the wealth space, ourselves included, and that includes releasing wealth in later life. So things like equity release, which can be important to many people for many different reasons. So I guess what I'd say is it's all quite different to that single product from 1843, but we haven't lost our purpose in what we're trying to do.
And maybe, I know we're going to get into this, but since you've mentioned the word, maybe you can just sort of share what is the purpose, and then sort of connect it with that. Why is it important that you're a mutual?
Great question. Look, I think that's where our mutual focus really shows up. And it shows up in a couple of very clear areas. So first of all, we don't have shareholders like a proprietary business would have. So instead, we return value to our members, and we do that through a range of different ways. And that's a real differentiator of a mutual. So we distribute bonuses. This year, we distributed 100 million, an 80 million one-off, and a 20 million regular bonus. We provide benefits such as legal advice, discounts on products and services. But importantly, our members also get a voice. So we have a 2,500 strong member community, and they get a say in where we put our efforts and where we put our energy. So that's the first thing I would say about the mutuality point. And then turning to being purpose-driven. So, of course, it's a key focus to concentrate on financial returns, but we can look broader than just financial returns. So that remit means we absolutely consider very actively colleagues and wider communities in the decisions and the actions that we take. Again, a couple of examples. Our LV Together program, which concentrates on social mobility, is one that's very close to my heart. We support the King's Trust. But of course, to do all of those things, we still need to be financially strong. So I'm absolutely focused with my leadership team on creating a sustainable business. And our 2025 financial results evidence that. We've got strong investment returns, good capital strength, strong sales, particularly across protection and equity release. And that's all really important to deliver, even though We have a broader remit. Financial results are still important to the mutual.
So, I mean, would it be fair to describe LV as a business with a social remit?
I always think that descriptive sentences don't necessarily convey the full breadth of an organization.
Yeah.
Absolutely, we are part of a wider community. Absolutely, very concentrated on wider society. But I think it's the effort we put into the long-term sustainability for our customers and members that I would say is probably more a fuller description of what we do.
Yeah. And if I've got it right, you stepped into the CEO at a really pivotal point for the business. When that happened, were you sort of coming in with David, we're hiring you because we've got this stuff we want you to do? Or was it more you saw an opportunity and kind of sold it to the board and that's why they hired you?
Look, LV's got a long history as a great business and it's got a great purpose, which we just touched on. So I'm probably not drawn to sort of a redefinition in terms of what we had to do. But I think I could see we had the opportunity to reach a bit higher with what we were doing with a bit of a guiding hand. And a couple of examples of that would be, for me, the most important thing I think at the start was to reinstill some pride with our colleagues. So I very firmly believe that if you're proud to be somewhere, you'll give your best. And we had a bit of work to do in that. We also needed to realize our distribution potential with partners, and we've made good progress in that. And I would also say we're to recognize that there are always trade-offs when you need to drive business performance. If we just kept doing everything the same way as we had before, we just get the same outcome. So I think some things were areas to work on, let's put it that way. And I think at a personal level, CEOs have to be a leader for all seasons. So how you show up every day is really important. And ultimately, leadership and decisions are not always black and white. Often you're working in shades of grey. Now, I'm perfectly okay in grey. I'm all right with that. But sometimes your job as a CEO is to help steer things to a bit of a clearer place for the organisation. And we've seen some good results in that. Our colleague engagement has shifted from -40 when I got here to +48, which I'm really proud of.
Yeah.
Our colleagues are very positive about recommending us as a place to work. We've got some great recognition for our products, for our service and our culture. And again, coming back to our financials, our results have been delivered really well year on year. Of course, that's the day job.
Could I come back to something you said just a minute or so ago? Just ask you to kind of unpack that a little bit more, particularly for anybody who might be listening who's not all that completely up to speed with insurance and how it works. You talked about increasing your distribution potential and working with partners. So what kind of, in very simple language, what does that mean and how'd you do it?
Yeah, so sometimes people think of LV as being only a direct-to-consumer brand. And of course, that's an important part of what we do. But we work a lot with intermediaries, so with financial advisors, with networks, with brokers. And a lot of our sales are through those partners. And so when I talk about making sure we enhance the way we work with partners, making sure we make the most of our distribution potential, it's about making sure that we spend time with those partners, we talk to them about what they're looking for, and we make sure we give them the service they want. And I think that's something which we've always got to concentrate on.
And what if you had to make a very short list of the biggest challenges you're facing currently, what would be on the top of that very short list?
Look, I guess we're not immune to the outside world like anybody else. No business is, and the geopolitical environment does create some market volatility and some uncertainty. I think that shows up in a number of ways. I mean, crucially, it can impact customers' desire to make long-term financial decisions because sometimes people will want to put those decisions off, not knowing quite what the future might hold. More locally, of course, we're always balancing inflation and seeing increasing costs while at the same time wanting to continue to invest in the business. And that's a bit of a balancing act for us, as it is for any firm. I think one thing I would note, though, is one of our strengths is helping members to navigate volatility. We offer something called a smooth managed fund range, which is designed to minimize market shocks. And that will be very reassuring in the current world for people. There are challenges there, won't pretend that there aren't. But I do think we've got some things in our armory which are advantageous.
And a topic I know you must think a certain amount about anyway. I suppose it depends a bit on how reflective a personality you are. But, financial services, obviously from some of the things we've been talking about, sit really close to, kind of people's lives, their savings, their future, their security. How does that impact you as a chief exec? How do you think about sort of your role in the midst of that?
Look, I think the important challenge for any CEO, and I would absolutely say this was the challenge for me, is to build the right team. So I work with a team of experts in their fields. I trust them to deliver the plan. And to do that, you've got to be confident that you've got the best team that you can around you. And I think that's a crucial part of the CEO's job, whether you're in financial services or elsewhere. And on that, I probably return back to a point I touched on earlier about pride, organizational pride. So colleagues give their best if they feel proud, but also if they feel welcomed. One of our LV messages is "This is us." And I think the CEO's role in that is to create the us and to find more from the team than from the sum of the individuals. So I do think that's an important bit of the leader's job. But secondly, I think a CEO's role is to make sure that we have a business plan which builds a stronger business. So we've got a board-backed plan for our customers and members at the heart of it. But we also listen to our members through the AGM, through the member community, lots of other ways. And I think they're important bits about building a strong, robust, resilient firm, because, as you say, financial services sits very close to people's lives.
Yeah. And what's again in sort of simple terms that the sort of the ordinary person could understand, what's the strategy? What are you trying to achieve over the next few years?
Well, we're very clear on our purpose as a financial mutual, and in that to offer a diverse but focused range of products and services and advice. But we're focused on where our strengths are and what matters to customers and members. So whilst we constantly innovate our proposition, we don't and we won't pretend to offer every type of insurance to everyone. That's not the nature of our business. We're not a waterfront player in as much as we don't offer general insurance products, and it's not why customers come to us. So we've got 5 pillars to our strategy. They're very straightforward, very easy to understand. The first is financial strength, which means being sustainable and growing. And that's critical as a mutual. So, for example, we recently got recognition from Standard & Poor's, our credit rating agency, and got uprated, which is fantastic. It's great news. The second pillar is being market leaders in our chosen markets. So, for example, our wealth offering, very important to us, very important to those advisors I talked about earlier, and then getting recognition for that. A third of the 5 pillars is about service excellence, and that's about delivering great service every day, but also giving choice to our customers. So we've got digital where digital's helpful and alternatives where it's not. A fourth pillar is having colleagues thrive, and that's a positive place to be, commending us as a place to work. And as I said, we've seen a big shift in colleague engagement. And then finally, members rewarded. Being a mutual, we can return value. Sometimes that's through bonuses, sometimes that's through benefits, sometimes through a really positive return on investments. So 5 pillars, very straightforward, very easy to understand.
Yeah. If I could just ask a couple of questions about some of that. When you're talking about the wealth offering, I think you used the word leading, and that's a word that I've heard lots of people use in lots of different ways. Sometimes they sort of mean leading being the best. Sometimes it means the biggest. Sometimes it means we're the most innovative. What does it mean for you?
I think being the biggest is never going to be what we are here. That's not what we do. We don't have we don't have every product in every market, and to be a leader, I think in scale, you need to be in a very wide range of markets. We are a leader in a number of markets, but where we choose to focus. For me, what leading is about is making sure that we're listening to advisors, listening to members, listening to customers, and making sure the proposition we offer is as good as it can be for what they want. It's very easy to offer a bells and whistles offering of a product to the market, but if it's not what anybody wants, there was no point in doing it.
So I'm kind of getting that best, at least the way you're leading, the way you're describing it is, we're the closest to what people actually really want. We're the best at meeting what they really need.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah. One other thing, maybe a bit slightly off piste, but you talked about sort of customer service. Just curious, are you using any external benchmarks or things like the Institute of Customer Services or whatever? Are you using things like that to help that it's not just us believing our own rhetoric, but actually there's independent advice, independent evaluation?
Absolutely. We do a lot of research where we ask customers to give us feedback, and we do that after every transaction that we have with customers who contact us by phone, for example. But we also do a lot of benchmarking externally, and we get a lot of feedback from advisors because being largely intermediated, of course, advisors are very happy to tell you what service offer is like from competitors. So we get a lot of insight that you just falls in your lap as well as going out and doing research.
Yeah. So you talked about advisors again. It's a bit slightly off piste, but I think it would be interesting. I've been around the sort of financial service world long enough to have heard the death of the IFA multiple times. And yet they seem to be robust and thriving, and you're clearly seeing them as a useful way to connect with customers who want to connect with you. What's your sense of where all that's going?
I think customers make choices about how they want to interact with financial services.
Mm-hmm.
And there's absolutely a role for financial advice. I think that many, if you think about any other walk of life, you probably wouldn't go and buy a product you knew nothing about without researching it. And if you thought it was going to be one of the biggest parts of your life, your retirement savings, for example, I think you'd want to go and get independent financial advice to support you in that. So I think we should always recognize that IFAs have a very important and professional role to play in the market. And like you, I've been around in financial services a long time, and I've heard many, many versions of that same story. And we're delighted to carry on working with independent financial advisors.
If I could sort of shift the gears a little bit and kind of move from what's the strategy to how did you develop it? How did the strategy that you've got come about? If you could sort of take us into the rooms, who would we see there? What would they be doing? How long did it take? All those sorts of questions.
I'm going to give a couple of answers to that, if that's okay, because I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, because I think it's a crucial part of the question you just asked, which is I think you have to have the right people in the right team with the right skills in order to build the strategy and in order to build the plan. And a big part of that is having people who bring complementary skills and people who are willing to challenge each other. So the worst case, and I've been here before, you try and build a strategy and everyone says the same thing and they sort of agree when the chief executive says what they want to do. And then you end up with the chief executive's wish list, which is not a strategy at all. And I'm very clear, we don't do that, we won't do that, and we didn't do that. We have a group of people in my executive team who are very complementary, but very different and bring very different skills. And so if you put them all in that room that you talked about, you'd see people behaving in different ways, but all contributing and all willing to challenge and all put their ideas on the table. So I think that's the most important thing, is to have different views coming into the room. And in particular, having a good balance of people who represent customer, people who represent advisor, people who represent finance and functions. I think you need to have that breadth. So I'd go there first. And I'd say on that leadership point, I think organization leadership more generally is ultimately about stewardship. And that's what building a strategy is about. You're stewarding a business by deploying a strategy. And look, I hope the decisions we've taken reflect a good long-term view. And I hope that they recognize, the disciplined approach we've taken to building that strategy. But I think the last thing I'd say on it is, it's all about delivery. So it's fine to have a great strategy, but you've got to deliver it. One of our jobs is to make sure we stay true to ensuring the organization is completely aligned in that strategy. After you've written it, after you've documented it, after you've shared it with stakeholders, you need to stay aligned in how you deliver that and in the intent to turn it into action. Otherwise, all it is good intent and no outcome.
So, I mean, how do you do that? Because I think almost every CEO would say something very similar to what you've said. Few would say, "Oh, the key thing is to drop it on the floor and make sure everybody does what they want." So, how, if you have any practical sort of thoughts about, so here's part of what we do. We do this every month. We do that every quarter. I pay a lot of attention to these sorts of things because that's telling me we're getting there. We're not. Anything in that sort of area?
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. I mean, these are off the top of my head, so they may not be particularly well articulated, but we use something called a balanced scorecard, and we refine it a little bit every year. It is truly balanced, as it has a number of financial measures. It also has a range of customer, risk, and colleague measures. And that really brings us back to, if we deliver that scorecard every year or very close to it, we are then delivering our strategy in terms of the way we break that down in our plan. So that's an important thing that what we do, and we spend a lot of time on that. Second, something which we introduced last year, actually, and I'm not sure everyone loved it when I came up with the idea, but it's a list we use. It's the sort of top 7 to 10 things that we have to deliver as an executive team. And it's not an even balance. So you don't have one from each of my 10 direct reports. It just happens to be outcomes that we have to deliver. And every month at our exec team meeting, we do all the usual reporting, of course, as you do through MI and data. But then we go back to towards the end of the meeting, how are we doing against these, as it happens this year, it's 7 things. How are we doing against these 7 things? And who needs what from who in order to make sure that we deliver that and we keep it as green can be as we go through the year. And that's proven very helpful. I mean, it kind of puts people on the spot a little bit to have to talk about it, because you probably had 3 hours in an exec meeting and you weren't looking to, spend more time on this list that David made up. But it is the things that if we concentrate on delivering those things, we're delivering our strategy.
You didn't call it this, but I've certainly heard of similar lists. Often it's the CEO who writes them, and it's almost sort of their worry list. If we get these over the line, actually, we're all good. I mean, yeah, we may get a little bit of grief here and there, but we'll be all good. If we drop one of these, we're going to have an ongoing problem.
It's incredibly easy to obsess about something in a big MI pack that's gone red. And actually, whilst it's sort of important, it won't change the world.
Yeah. Wow. Did you come to this list for a particular reason, or was it just, despite all this MI and, balanced scorecard, there are a few things I just need to make sure we get done. What sparked that?
I think it's about stakeholders. So I mentioned earlier on, of course, we don't have shareholders. And so there's no shareholder holding us to account, but the board holds us to account, the regulator holds account, members hold us to account. So we have perhaps a broader range of stakeholders more generally than initially might look to be the case. And so I would say that list is, if I think about it now, I'm probably over theoreticizing this at this point. But I think I would say I would consider my stakeholders and think, who am I accountable to for what? And what things are going to challenge that? And that list is the stuff that would challenge it.
If you don't mind, I kind of like to focus in on you a bit. So you've clearly had a lot of experience, been a lot of, with a lot of great brand names and providing, some great leadership and direction where you are. But what got you into this, and what kept you in the field you're in?
It's a great question. I'm not entirely sure I know how to answer, but
that's a great answer.
I actually think that I kind of found a groove quite early on in my career. And not many other people were in that groove. So when I started out originally in banking before I went to insurance, most people went down the sort of risk line, or they went down the corporate banking or investment banking line. And I, from a very early age, ran large-scale operations, so contact centers, branches. And it wasn't something that people just coming off a graduate scheme ever really went into. And then I did bigger operational jobs over time as I moved along. And then I did the same sort of thing against many people who become MDs or CEOs. A lot of them have had backgrounds certainly in insurance, either as FDs, CFOs, or actuaries. And of course, I came out of an operations line and then became an MD, then became a CEO. I mean, many, many years ago now, of course. That was probably a bit of a repeat for me, which was I went into something people didn't naturally do. Then I went from that with a background that people didn't naturally have and found that same groove again. And then you find yourself in jobs like this and you think, actually, what are the bits of the job I'm good at? Which are the bits of the job I'm not? And so I don't imagine at this stage of my career, I'm going to find a completely different career path. I think that will be unlikely. But I do think financial services plays a really important role in people's lives. And I think it's important to have people who care about that. Probably the most important thing, if I was thinking about, why would I do what I do? I love the fact that we've brought pride back to this organization in the way we have. And I think that is probably something on repeat that I've done over the years, or I hope I've done over the years. And that's probably what motivates me to keep doing it.
Yeah. There's a word you haven't used about LV, and maybe it's a word you wouldn't like associated with it. But if you don't mind for a minute, I'm going to, and then just get your thoughts on it. And it's the word institution. It's been around a long time. It's sort of feels to me like it's relatively enduring part of the landscape. And I just curious if you see it that way at all, and if so, what is that a positive or a negative? And if it's a positive, what are you doing to ensure it sustains as an institution, as sort of a part of British life?
That's a fantastic question. I don't think I would use the word institution. I think the word institution always has sort of connotations around it, probably inappropriately, but people think of it sometimes in a somewhat negative way. Perhaps the word immovable is often associated with it, which isn't how I would see LV. I think we've been innovative in becoming the LV we are today from the LV we would have been back in the day. We're not going quite back to 1843 here, but even in recent times, I think we've continued to innovate. And I think institutions sometimes don't have that. What I do think, though, is we have a fantastic brand name that's really well recognized. I think our service delivery is good and positive. I think the products and propositions we offer prove to be useful time and time again, and our customers love interacting with us. So the positive bits of being an institution are people want to be there, people want to work with you, and you endure. I think sustainability are probably words I would use more than institution, but I very much hope that our great brand name endures.
Well, likewise. One of the reasons I was even sort of getting into that question is, as I'm sure you're very aware, there's a generation that, at least on the data, and I think you got to pay attention to the data somewhat, is kind of struggling to find their way into a little bit what you were saying, sort of find their way into a groove. You can't find your way into a groove unless you've got a job. It can be a bit hard. Do you see LV as having a key role to play in that, or is it more the market will kind of sort itself out? We hire people, that's great. Or is there more to it than that around helping people find their way into a job and finding their way into a career?
We're very fortunate in that we don't have a lot of attrition. And when we do have attrition, we have a great number of candidates for our roles. We don't struggle to recruit at all. People want to come and work at LV, which is a lovely place to be. Beyond that, I think we do a lot, and some of it is probably not very visible, to make sure that we create an environment where people want to be, but also want to stay. So, for example, in our customer experience functions, we've got a great set of processes and mechanisms for getting people into bigger, broader jobs over time. We're very open about opportunities that we have. We do a lot of secondments. We do a lot of apprenticeships. And we also do some work, as I mentioned earlier, with the King's Trust about encouraging people who might not naturally have as many opportunities to come in and see what the workplace is like. People sometimes misunderstand what working in an office or attached to an office, for those who are home workers, is like. And actually, when they see it, they feel quite differently. One of the measures, I think, which is quite interesting, we have quite a number of people who have worked here for some time, whose children, when they've graduated or left school, come and work here as well. And we have quite a number of those. In fact, I met a couple of them earlier on today, funnily enough. And I think that's a really nice thing, because if you're willing to recommend for your child to come and work here, I think that's saying something.
Yeah. When you're talking about some of the things you're doing, you talked about secondments. And of course, I know what the word means, but as a practical matter, what does it mean at LV? Is it people internally moving, or bringing people in from outside, or sending some of your people somewhere else? How does all that work?
Typically, it means we've got a gap somewhere for a period of time, somewhere in the organization, and that somebody else has, through their succession planning or career mapping, indicated that's a sort of role they'd like to do. And then we offer it as a secondment internally for someone to go across and do. And we advertise that quite openly. And we don't really struggle to get people who want to do that. In fact, we've got a couple of team manager roles at the moment where, for various reasons, the incumbents have gone off. I think one's gone traveling and one's doing something else. And while they're off doing that, we've had a number of secondees who've gone and taken those roles. It's a great experience. People go back to the role they were in, but they've developed some new skills as a result of learning. We've filled a gap we had for a short period of time.
Well, I can imagine you might also find that when they come in, even if they're only there for a short period of time, they bring an idea or two.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Could I throw two other topics in just to see where they take us? One is regulation, and the other's AI. I'll tell you part of the reason I'm even raising regulation. There are certain sectors in the UK economy that I think there's a pretty shared view that the regulatory process has not worked, and some fundamental rethink on that. I don't know I'd put financial services in that category, but just your thoughts on what's, from your perspective as a CEO, what works for regulation and where does it kind of get difficult for you?
I think the regulatory environment in financial services works. I think it's essential. I think it's important. I think it provides a valuable authority to the markets that we operate in. So I think generally it does what it needs to do. I think what we've seen over the last few years in particular is a real recognition by the lead regulators that they are keen to adapt. They're keen to work closer with firms. We see more direct engagement engagement, also more thematic work across the industry. And some of the positives of that, I would say, include when they do a piece of market work looking at something like the protection market, for example, or the equity release market, then not only the things they might have found that weren't working so great, but they also share things that are working well.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important role a regulator can play, which is calling out the good practice as well as absolutely, of course, shining a light where that practice is not so good. I think the other thing which we've seen, and this is very current actually, is the regulators actively doing things to simplify and make processes better and faster. We see this at the moment, for example, on regulatory approvals, which are coming through much quicker than they did once upon a time, but just as thoroughly and just as diligently. So I think the regulators are absolutely up for playing their part in an efficient sector. And I see that living its life at the moment.
One of the things that I think is true, and it's sort of one of the most optimistic things, but in some ways one of the most tragic. So let me lay it out and get your thoughts about it. I think almost any industry that I've ever worked in, almost everybody actually wants to do the right thing. They want to do a good job. They want to provide their customers with a good product or service. And I think where regulators can, and they often do, play a really key role in sort of almost like a balance wheel on a clock, kind of keeping all that in an orderly way really plays a big difference. So just, am I, and the tragedy is where it all somehow gets at loggerheads and everybody's focused. And you're bringing a very optimistic view to it, which I think is great. But do you think I'm overly rosy thinking that almost everybody in most industries wants to do the right thing?
I think most people come into this sector with the intent to do the right thing. And I think corporate governance plays a part in that as well, which is boards, executive teams, committee structures. They all have a relevant role to play. And I don't think it's just down to individuals. I think what we see is the importance of having an open and transparent relationship with regulators. And I think that plays an important part. I think it's essential. And I think building that over time probably encourages that view you've got, which is, I think most people do want to do the right thing. And most people do want to share openly and transparently. I guess there will always be situations where the negative is proven.
Yeah. Let's talk about AI. Two things I'd be interested in exploring. One is sort of where have you and LV gotten to in embracing it and using it? And then what are you finding sort of is surprising, either surprising positive or we thought we could do this with it, but it turns out it's not as straightforward as you think.
Yeah, I mean, I would say we are middle of the pack in terms of our speed of adopting AI. I wouldn't claim that we have made masses of strides in every area. We have in one or two, but we've been very focused. So our approach has been to be very use case driven. So we haven't built a big army of people. We do have a small number of people who are supporting our AI-led programs. And we see some opportunities in some of the higher volume areas, which we're testing out. And we do have some processes. They just take a long time and they should take less time. And we have to find ways to do that. And AI probably plays its part in those. One area where we have deployed something into some of our contact center areas is there's a horrible term, but I'll use it because it is what it is. Call containment, which is things which you don't need to speak to somebody for. You can absolutely talk to our automated human, and our automated human can help a customer just as easily because they're phoning for a form, they're phoning for a link, they want to have really straightforward things. I was a bit suspect when we first started rolling it out because I thought perhaps people will just do some things I sometimes do when I call them like, I don't want to do that. I just want to talk to a human. But what we found is actually a very large number of calls are not only handled that way, but the feedback from customers is entirely positive on it because they didn't wait.
Fantastic.
They didn't have to do anything other than tap in some very, very straightforward but secure details. And they got exactly what they wanted while they were still on the call. Now, we couldn't have done that quicker. No human could have worked that any quicker. No postal system could have got it to them quicker. And actually, customer feedback is very positive about it. And it means a lot of calls are then not going into a queue, because most calls will go into a queue, even if it's for a very short period of time. And therefore, other customers who do need to speak to somebody are getting to speak to them sooner and having a more fulsome conversation. So where we've done it, I think it's worked really well. We need to keep finding more use cases.
And I mean, if you're willing to share anything, you may not even need to go too deep into the specifics, but anything you tried and it was a bit disappointing.
I don't think we have really. I suspect we will do at some point. We've got a few operational tests out at the moment, more than we've done in the past, and so we'll see how they go. I mean, I don't really mind if one or two of them fail. I think if nothing fails, we probably haven't been ambitious enough, as long as we haven't devoted too much resource to it.
Fantastic. Wait, and one final question for you, maybe, which is if you had one piece of advice to give to someone who is either a current CEO or thinking, do I want to become a CEO of a business, I'll say like yours, in the sense that you've got both a commercial imperative, but you've got other things you're also trying to do. You're thinking about long-term sustainability, et cetera, Any bit of advice?
I think I'd go back to something I said about myself earlier on, which is you have to be able to live in a world of grey sometimes, and you have to be the leader for all seasons, because different things will happen to what you thought were going to happen, and you'll have to reroute and you'll have to replan, and sometimes it's not immediately evident what that is. So be able to live in a land of grey.
Just as a thought from me on that, for what it's worth, even in our short conversation here, two things I think have come through. And maybe this is what you mean by a leader for all seasons. You seem very kind of settled and calm, but also upbeat, optimistic. That's an interesting and powerful mix.
I think if the CEO's not upbeat, the wrong CEO's in the chair.
That's probably good advice, maybe even for anybody in any role.
Indeed.
So, David, I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's been great fun.
It's been great. Thank you.
No, not at all. So I will thank you again for joining us and say I'll look forward, if you're open to the idea of catching up at some point and hearing what the next couple of years of the journey is like.
Absolutely. I look forward to it very much.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Purposeful Strategist. In addition to being available on our website, you can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. If you enjoyed this episode, please do follow us and leave a 5-star review. It helps others find the podcast. Thanks again, and join us soon for the next episode of The Purposeful Strategist.